What is up, guys? Doug Polk here, and we're back with another episode of Poker Hands. Today we're going to be looking at a hand played from the 2016 World Series of Poker Main Event, and it might be a hand that you know if you've been paying attention to the recent episodes. I thought we'd jump into it and talk about some decisions made. So on that note, let's go ahead and get into the hand.
Ruane on the button with 9-8 of clubs after Spaniard Fernando Pons opened under the gun with king-queen of diamonds. Ruane calls for 450,000. James Obst in the small blind with sevens just calls. And now Qui Win, the local, with a taste for baccarat with 9-6.
And Qui Win still wearing that hat. A friend needs to set up an intervention.
All right, Win with great pot odds for him. Does call. Four-way flop now.
I'm just going to quickly gloss over pre-flop because I think everyone played their hand fine, and we have a lot of analysis to do post-flop. But Pons up was under the gun with king-queen suited to 450,000, which is about 2.25 the big blind, which is completely standard. We get a call on the button from Ruane, who has 9-8 suited, another totally fine hand to call. 3-betting could be okay. Obst calls in the small blind with pocket sevens, and Win comes along the big blind with 9-6 off, but still a reasonable hand getting that good of odds. Let's take a look at the flop.
And the flop is queen 7. Jack Obst comes up big with a set of sevens. Ruane picks up a straight flush draw. The table chip leader Obst checks and Win checks.
Pons flops top pair, big kicker. He's going to bet, and he's 4%.
With the pair of queens, does bet 625. Ruane now with that straight flush draw.
I'd like to immediately apologize to Michael. That was a pretty good-looking jump shot.
Norman, at what point do you fold a straight flush draw?
I do not. Not in this or any subsequent lifetime.
Ruane putting some big chips together. And that is a raise to $2,025,000.
Well, I think Obst has exactly what he wants. But remember, Pons raised under the gun pre-flop, so it's possible he could have pocket queens or jacks, and then this would be a set over set situation.
Obst with the set of 7.
5.3.
Wants to re-raise to 5.3 million. Get out of my pot. Win folds. Pons does get out of the way. Back to Ruane now.
Who's thinking, oops, I might be in big trouble. He could be facing a set or even an ace-high flush draw here.
Pot's already almost 10 million. Both of these gentlemen started the hand with more than 22 million in front of them, and there's a call from Ruane.
The flop comes queen, jack, 7, 2 clubs, and I guess this is what you could call an action flop because 3 players have flopped huge pieces of this board. Only the big blind has 9-6 and can just get out of there, but under the gun has top pair, the button has a straight flush draw, and the small blind flopped a set. Under the gun decides to bet, Pons decides to bet here, which I think is okay. I don't mind bet or check, they're both reasonable. Keep in mind when there's a lot of people in the pot, you might want to try and slow play some hands you'd normally bet because other people can have you beat, and it's much more likely that's going to occur. But betting is fine. The bet size seems a little bit small, I might want to bet a little bit bigger. One thing I've noticed about deep in tournaments is players seem to bet way too small based on just the fact you're deep. If you're short stacked, betting smaller makes sense, but don't just use small sizes because you're deep in a tournament and you're, just trying to, I guess, survive longer. I don't really know what the logic is, but don't do it. Anyway, the button now decides to raise it up with 9-8 of clubs. And, it's not a bad play. You take away the initiative from the under the gun player so you can decide to bet turn or river. You knock out some people out of the pot. So there's lots of good things here. But my problem with this play is that it gets kind of ugly if you face large 3-bets. Because when you get 3-bet, yeah, you can call the turn. But let's just say you get 3-bet on the flop, call turn, and then they jam on the turn. Sorry, call flop, and then they jam on the turn. Now what are you going to do? You're forcing yourself out of the pot with a flush draw and a straight draw. That's just not a good situation when you have a hand this strong. So I kind of lean more towards a call on the flop and play some turns, maybe looking to raise with a weaker flush draw or a stronger one where, let's say you have ace 10 of clubs or king 10 of clubs. Then if they jam turn, you can just call it off. And if you have a weaker one, like let's just say 8-6 of clubs, you could raise and then call a 3-bet and then fold the turn. Both those situations are fine. But what I'm trying to avoid having happen in this hand is getting 3-bet here on the flop and then putting yourself in a tough spot on the turn. Anyway, the raise is still fine. It's a little smaller again than I would like to make it, but there's some advantages to this, and I don't mind the action. Now, this is where the hand gets really interesting to me, and I almost feel like the most important part of this entire hand, it comes down to the way the small blind has to play. Because here's the thing about the small blind. The small blind has a much more narrow range than either the button or the big blind. In the small blind, you're not getting great odds to flat, and you're going to have to go first pre, so it's not a very advantageous spot to try and play hands. For this reason, when I'm in the small blind, I think the strongest hands you're really going to have here are Queen Jack suited or 7-7. Maybe he's not going to elect a 3-bet jacks against an under the gun open, which could be okay, but queens should really be 3-betting. So, you know, maybe Jack, but definitely 7-7 and Queen Jack suited. And other than that, you have a bunch of hands that are in pretty precarious spots here. You have, you know, Ace Queen, King Queen, Queen 10 suited, Queen 9 suited maybe, Ace Jack suited, King Jack suited, Jack 10 suited. You know, maybe a hand like Ace 9 of clubs, maybe a hand like 10-9 of spades. You know, you have all these hands that are pretty. You have all these hands that have a decent part of the board. So I think there's two ways to approach this on the flop. And don't get me wrong, poker is a very complex game, so I don't want you to think that I'm saying this is right or this is wrong, because I can see two reasonable ways to operate here out of the small blind, okay? The first way you could do it is you could decide to call with all of your hands. And I kind of like that approach here, because if you're going to have re-raises with hands like sets or Queen Jack, then what's going to happen to you is when you call, what does that mean, right? What does it mean when you call? So you're really leaving your hands like Ace Queen, King Queen, Queen 10, King 10 of diamonds, nut flush draw. You're leaving all of those hands out to dry here by having a raise range on the flop, okay? But if you're going to do that, I think you need to work in some bluffs, maybe work in a hand like some very strong draws like King 10 of clubs or 10-9 of clubs or you know, Ace 10 of clubs, and then maybe even a few bluffs like the backdoor nut flush draw of spades. You know, maybe Ace 10 of spades would be a nice backdoor, nice bluff raise as well. So if you're going to have flop 3-bets, you do need to work in some bluffs there, so that you know your opponent, if they make a fold with a big hand or a good hand, they're going to make a mistake. And really, this raise knocks pawns out of the pot with top pair. So you can kind of see the power of, if you did have a hand like Ace 10 or King 10 raising there, if pawns even has a hand like aces or kings, he kind of has to get out of there too. So really, this spot to raise, especially if you think Ruane is light, could be a good bluff spot. So I don't mind not raising at all and playing more hands and calling more, or having a small raise range of some strong hands and some bluffs. I think those are both reasonable ways to play it. Obst decides to go ahead and re-raise, making it 5.3 million with a set, which I'm fine with. And it's back over to Ruane. Pawns gets out of the way, back over to Ruane. And now he has a difficult decision that he's kind of put himself in by raising the flop, because he can absolutely call here, no doubt about that. But it's going to leave about pot size behind, roughly, maybe a little more behind than what's in the pot on the turn. And if Obst decides that Ruane's on a draw and jams, then Ruane is going to be fucked, okay? So that's one of the reasons I don't like raising this hand on the flop. Not that it's going to happen a lot, but it definitely will put you in a tough situation. Anyway, Ruane makes the call, and let's play the turn.
Turn card now. What a pot we've got going. Is the 10 of clubs, Ruane with the straight flush. I don't remember the last time we saw a straight flush, Norman.
I'm sorry, Lon. That card seems beyond the realm of realistic human possibility.
It's so exciting. Obst checked it.
Obst does know it was very possible Ruane was on a flush draw.
And now Michael Ruane with the nuts of the nuts. Doesn't slow play at a bet of 3.75 million.
The pot is swelling. Obst has got to call and hope the board pairs.
Well, he still loses if the board pairs.
He doesn't know that. We can see all the hole cards. They can't.
Oh, okay. Obst has to have concerns about that board, but the bet was so small from Ruane, and he still has possibilities in his mind. He makes the call.
The turn is the magical 10 of clubs, and all of a sudden Ruane has a straight flush on the button. Can you think of a better spot to be in the main event? Oh my God, one time. Anyway, this card is really bad for Obst, because now he knows that if his opponent had a hand like the nut flush draw, he's gotten there, and he could still actually have a few hands, maybe like Jack Jack or Queen Queen against under the gun open, although those are pretty unlikely. So, if I'm Obst here, I think my opponent has either a hand that's like, maybe a hand like Queen Jack, maybe a hand like King 10, maybe a hand like 10-9, or a flush. Realistically, maybe a hand like Jack Jack or Queen Queen, but pretty rare. So I don't think it makes sense to bet here on the turn when your opponent either has you beat or, they have a hand that you have pretty well locked up or pretty well crushed. So I like the check. The check makes a lot of sense here. Now, this bet from Ruane where he bets 4 million, he has about basically about pot size behind. He bets about 1/4 pot. He bets about 1/3 pot. Let me rephrase that. He has a little more than pot behind. We're going to get there, guys. He has about 130% pot, and he decides to bet about 25-30% of the pot. And here's what I like and don't like about that bet. What I like about that bet is you get some value against an opponent who very likely has Queen Jack or a set. I mean, when we think about the kinds of hands that Obst is going to 3-bet here, for value, it's going to be Queen Jack, Jack Jack, 7-7, or he's bluffing, right? And if he's bluffing, it doesn't really matter much anyway because he's probably not going to have a club in his hand out of the small blind, and so it's not really that big of a deal either way. But I will argue that by betting here, you remove his ability to draw to a boat when he has Queen Jack, and you also remove his ability to try and bluff you on the river when he has King 10 or 10-9 and decides that he wants to have some bluffs on the river. You take away that ability too. So I think I would like a check here on the turn, and I actually think if we did see a check on this turn, he would, I'll save the spoiler alert for the river, but I think a check makes more sense, and when you have a hand that's this strong, it generally makes sense to try and keep your opponent in. Now, I do like that he went with a small bet size. I think that makes sense, but I would have liked to see maybe either a little bit bigger or check here on the turn. Anyway, after Ruane does bet, Obst has a clear call. He's getting, maybe not direct odds to boat. It's very close to direct odds to boat, and then obviously has some implied odds for if he pairs up on the river. Anyway, let's go ahead and see what the river is.
And the river card, another 10 Obst improves to that full house, but it's useless.
That is cruel and unusual punishment for James Obst. I don't know if he can take any legal action here, but I would defend him.
4.7.
Obst is going to try to get value for what he thinks is the best hand, 4.7 million.
Yeah, he bets just less than quarter of the pot. And if Obst somehow can get away from this hand after Ruane raises, he just saved himself some chips.
To Michael Ruane. He raises all in.
Look at the size of this pot. If Obst calls here, he'll be left with less than 20 big blinds.
The river is the cruel 10 of diamonds, and we can only imagine how happy Obst felt on the river before finding out the bad news. But anyway, this is a decision that I was a little confused by. I think this is probably the only mistake that Obst makes in this hand. I don't really understand this river play, betting 4.7 million here. I think that this needs to be all in. If you look at the stacks, he has about 13 million behind. The pot is currently about 20 million. I don't see a reason to bet just a chunk of his stack, leaving some behind. Look, I know you're deep in an event and you don't want to bust, you want to have some chips to play with, etc. But if you start playing hands way differently than they should be played, it gets kind of dicey in terms of trying to make the most money. And when you boat up on this river and they have you beat, it's just not your day, And it sucks that it's not your day and you're this deep in the main, you're so close you can taste it. And I know you want a final table, but if you river a boat after 3-betting the flop and someone has a straight flush, you just go home. You go home and you have a great bad beat story and a YouTube clip to go along with it, right? So if he decides to lead, he needs to jam. I don't mind checking. I think checking could be okay. Otherwise, he's going to have no hands. I mean, it's a weird spot in general because he's going to have so few hands to get here anyway. But I wouldn't mind seeing a check to protect against maybe a hand that might want to bluff him. But at the same time, it's hard for either person to have bluffs, and I don't mind leading. In fact, if you think about Ruane's range, Ruane either rivered trip 10s with King 10 or 10-9 or had a flush. So either way, those hands could both kind of reasonably decide to pay him off. And I think that a lead here makes sense. You might want to consider lead bluffing here with Queen Jack, given how small the turn bet was. Queen Jack would certainly have a difficult decision there. Maybe you just decide to let it go, but at the same time, if he does decide to call, this is about as good of a river to bluff as you can get. So I would prefer river jam with 7-7, maybe a few Queen Jacks, mix in some bluffs, and yeah, that would be a good way to play it. I don't like the very small 1/4 or 1/5 size pot bet here. I guess it's more like 1/4 pot bet, planning on folding to a jam. Now, Ruane has the most LOL easy river decision ever and jams and is back over to Obst. And really, Obst, seriously, in this hand, he just says, like, I think you have a straight flush, or how do you have a straight flush, and then folds his boat. And maybe Obst thinks he can have Jack-Jack or Queen-Queen here, which, you know, if he thinks that those are hands he can fold 7-7 and be okay. But you do have to have some calls here, right? And you're not going to have Queen 10, Jack 10. Those hands aren't going to 3-bet the flop. So I guess I would prefer to see Obst call with either some of his 7-7 or fold this and call with those higher pairs if he can have them pre-flop.
So it looks like you have a straight flush. Could be the best actor of all time.
Wow, what a laydown. Ruane will collect that mountain of chips.
A big laydown. And now we have a new big stack.
All right, that was a very complex hand, and hope you enjoyed it. Thank you for joining us this week on Poker Hands. Thank you for joining me for Poker Hands. If you like content like this, click that subscribe button. We have many more Poker Hands episodes coming up, and get ready to learn. Now, I know that in general, Negreanu tends to be a little more on the conservative side compared to most players. And so maybe there's some argument that you should be looking to find a fold with this hand at some point on the turn of the river. That's not really my style. When I flop a hand as strong as 9s on this board, I'm looking to go the distance.